In Agile, sometimes it's referred to as Scrum. You have a Scrum Master or a project leader. It's basically tasked with delivery considerations. It's that person that's responsible for doing these, assessing the progress, managing the process, removing any impediments that the team may face. Right? So that he's empowering the team to get the job done faster and giving them the best tools to do the job. And then, by employing some of the techniques I'm going to show you, you can be more adaptive. So Agile is also about having the right frameworks and architectures in place to be more adaptive in your response to changing requirements, changing needs. So to do this, I thought we'd walk through a typical process, data integration process. And what you see here is really nothing specific to data integration. It's just your typical development process. Design, build, test, and deploy. But if I blow it out a bit and take a look at this from a data integration perspective, we see that, typically the first step, and it may, vary, of course, from organization to organization, but typically for, say, a data warehouse BI project, I need to find the data sources, understand the data sources and targets, see if there's any data quality issues that need to be fixed. If I'm joining, two data sources from disparate systems, then, how do I do that and make sure that the join conditions are going to work? Okay. And then third is, once I've figured out the join conditions and the data quality and data cleansing rules that need to be applied, is create a mapping specification document that can be handed to a developer, translated, and then they build out the logic. But before they do that, they need to do some impact analysis, and that can be a very time-consuming step. And then we build it, do the unit testing, system testing, and finally, deploy it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to, over the next hour, we're going to walk through this process, and we're going to see ways to improve the process. And while I'm talking about Agile, these techniques can be used even in a waterfall approach. So, little fun games here. So this is probably a game that most of us are familiar with, at least in North America. Shoots and ladders. Maybe some of your kids have played it. Right? It's a pretty simple, basic game. Len still plays it quite often. And
just yesterday.
Yeah. We were playing it last night, right? But you start at, at the bottom lower left one, you roll a simple game, you roll the dice, and the first person to get to the top, 100, wins the game. The problem is that if you hit a shoot, you end up going back several steps, and if you hit a ladder, you get to advance several steps. So, the way I look at this is when you're doing this, process, invariably you end up hitting these chutes because you need to do rework. You need to go back a step in your process. Or, maybe the requirements were miscommunicated. So you need to go back. So all these iterations keep sending you back, several steps. If you're lucky enough to hit a ladder, I'll claim that that's, Informatica. Okay? So that allows you to advance, move ahead, improve the process. Okay? And now, so one tool that Lean provides you is, or suggests, is what's called the value stream map. And this is a pretty useful tool to design your process and to improve the process. Essentially, you take a practices is you can eliminate some of the back and forth, and you can eliminate the non-value added activity. And so the way we do this is through a set of best practices. And so this is what I do is 8 best practices, and we'll walk through these. The first is, the business and IT need to work efficiently and effectively to translate the requirements and the specifications into data services. And we all know that this typically, the application developer, once again, is going to create these data dumps into a spreadsheet so that the analyst can review it and look at it and understand what they have there. And if it's not exactly what they need, they're going to go back and do it again. Right? In other words, the analyst doesn't have direct access to this information. The analyst needs to get access either through a DBA or a developer to preview it. Or they might write their own SQL scripts and run their SQL scripts to get a better understanding of the data and see if there's any issues in terms of standardization or quality. So we can improve this with a browser-based tool that the analyst can use without the help of the developer to access the data they need and profile and understand it. Now, for those that profile the data today, how do you do it? Do you use a data dump to a spreadsheet? Do you grant access to a sandbox environment? Are you using Informatica profiling today? So, I'll ask you, how many are using Informatica profiling today? Marty, did you see that? Only one. Marty's in sales. So, hopefully after this, I've convinced you that profiling can save you a lot of time. Okay, so here we're looking at a screenshot, but I'm actually going to bring this to life with a quick demo. Essentially what the profiling allows you to do now is, once again, without having to get the developer involved, can identify or infer what the foreign keys are in those child or other tables. So it's using profiling there. And once you do that, you can do a joint analysis, and that's what this little Venn diagram is, off to the right. That's kind of giving you a sense of how well these two tables are going to join. Is there any orphan rows? Things like that. We'll answer some of those because they're redundant values. And then you can, as you find a primary key, you can say, okay, add this as a primary key, or add this as a foreign key. And you build out that model within the developer tool. And you can share that model with other developers or whoever, so they can validate that that model looks correct. So just, I mean, that can save you a considerable amount of time. Do you agree? Yeah. I can't really shake your head, so I said okay, the fourth step is now the analyst is going to define a mapping specification or a mapping document. And this is typically done within Excel or a Word document. The analyst goes in, lists their sources, lists their targets, and describes what the transformation should be. And they hand that to the developer, and the developer has to figure out then, based on this high-level description, exactly what the analyst meant. How can I translate this into mapping logic, say, within PowerCenter? And so once again, there's an opportunity for miscommunication and errors to occur in that process. And as the miscommunication and errors occur, you have to go back and revisit some steps and iterate through this process again and again. Once again, a lot of non-value-added activity here. So the opportunity to improve this is, and that's what these starbursts are, is that if I can use that Informatica Analyst tool once again to build out the mapping specification in a central repository that's shareable, searchable, and available to automatically generate PowerCenter mappings, that's going to save you a lot of time. If it's all in a common repository, then all the key stakeholders involved in the project have access to it. Okay. So, the next question that I'd ask is, how many iterations does it take for business and IT within your organization to get the specifications right? So we'll just do this with a show of hands. Does it take less than 10? 1. 10 to 24. Okay. About 3 times as many. 25 to 49. 50 or more. And the rest, 0 iterations. There's a silent across the street. Are we all silent? Mentally transmit those specifications. Well, that's close to what you can do here. Not quite silent, but you providing an instruction to the developer to give me some rules to fix those problems. In the meantime, the developer can look at that specification, actually look at what's already been generated, suggest a rule. So now the analyst can go back into the analyst tool and kind of stick over the developer part. We can either assume that the developer built the rules or that the rules are already built. So now I can select a rule that's already been built to fix the data quality issue with the model number. So I'm going to browse for my rules. And this could be an ETL type rule too. I see standardized model number. Select that. And it's going to prompt me for the inputs and the outputs. The input from the source and then the output to the target. So the input's the model number and the output's the model number. I actually covered this in a previous presentation in terms of the importance of data virtualization and adaptive data services. But why this is important for Agile is because I can build it once, design and build, the data object, think of that target